Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. This is our Friday chat time, but we're going to preempt that with the preview of two short videos. The first one is the video of a radio event, actually, on Clare FM, which is the voice of County Clare in Ireland, and we'll be introduced by Pat Flynn, the presenter, who does a great job of asking me all the right questions of McDuff and who was Tom O'Loughlin, and so we'll get that together and start that up in just a moment. Followed by a second short video, which is produced by Marcia, my wife. She's just learning how to work iMovie and put together a very nice video presentation of the selected portions of the book launch itself, which occurred on August the 10th of, uh, of this year in the Temple Gate Hotel, which is a beautiful hotel in the middle of Ennis, Ireland. So, good morning to everyone who's joining us. And I think without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the video. Let's see. Hold on a second. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. Got to go to my system preferences and it's telling me I can't share the screen, and I'm a little bit embarrassed that I didn't know I was going to have to do Okay, finally, there we go.
McDuff Lives is a book based on the Navy career of Thomas Francis O'Loughlin, as well as his later career within the JFK administration. The book will be launched by his son John and his wife Marcia in the Templegate Hotel this afternoon. And John O'Loughlin joins me in studio. John, good morning to you.
And good morning to yourself.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you.
Very, very welcome. What's the story? Who is Thomas Francis O'Loughlin?
Well, Thomas Francis O'Loughlin Jr. is my father. He is the descendant of Ross Henry O'Loughlin, who immigrated to the United States in the early 1860s and married Hannah Kelleher, also of Ennis. They're both from Ennis, and they got married when they got to Connecticut. And I am actually the fifth generation of that marriage. So I think our family, being a diaspora family, and America at the time was really trying to be part of the establishment, kind of what they call the lace curtain Irish. And so his family pretty much lost all their Irish connections. And they, being from the West, they would have spoken Irish and everything. But my father didn't have a connection to Clare that he could say, well, I know this person is my cousin, or so and so forth. So my dad died young at 51 in 1971. And this book is kind of about his amazing career that I've studied since he died. He became a very important man in the secret part of the United States government. And his last 10 years were spent working in a very almost unknown office that was running all the special operations, meaning the special ops
Yes.
in the Southeast Asia and all of that. So I've discovered that he was a very important man that they really didn't want to talk about. So I've had to dig it all out myself.
How big a deal was that for you? It was a personal effort, obviously, and a passion that you would know your dad's life story. But growing up, how much would you have known about him and what he did?
Well, my first memory of him was that he worked in the FBI, and I knew he was an FBI agent. And for some reason, instead of following the path that I think was laid out for him in his Connecticut upbringing in Hartford, he decided that he wanted to take a different route through life. And so he joined the FBI after his law school, instead of becoming one of the white shoe Wall Street lawyers that they had wanted him to be. And he set his own path. And in his first assignment in Atlanta, Georgia, he fell in love with a Georgia belle named Mary Elizabeth. And so that's my mother. And I have something in me that just drives me to keep finding my roots. Musically, I've always just loved the Irish traditional music, which I discovered when I was in college and have pursued it ever since. But now I'm back here after, more than 50 years after my dad's death, and after about almost 10 years of research, I was able to put this book together to really tell the story.
A lot of hard work gone into this, obviously. So your dad was in U.S. Navy, then moved into the FBI, and as you already alluded to the secret side of it, so presumably the CIA?
No. Well, there's the interesting controversy, you see. Few people understand, but my research and others has confirmed that the FBI and the CIA were bitter enemies in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
And of course, by now it's all different. They're all pretty much the same conglomeration of whatever you want to call it, the same monster. But at that time, the FBI was a independent and different agency entirely. And a lot of what they were doing was discovering some of the bad things that the CIA was doing. And my father was part of that. It turns out he was very well respected by J. Edgar Hoover, and became kind of a personal emissary in a way to the other agencies, such as the CIA. So my dad knew CIA people, but had a different agenda. And I think that is the story that you'll read in the book, as to how he was part of an effort to expose the crimes, such as the importation of heroin in the bodies of our deceased service members from Vietnam, and to expose that and try to stop it. As you know, he died at 51 of what is now called quick cancer. He was in a position where I think he knew that they were after him, and it wasn't a great surprise that he died that young because of the work that he was doing and the struggle between himself and what were his friends from the military, because he was a Navy man, to try to steer the country back into a real republic, and to quash all of that skullduggery that was going on and leading to the wars and the secret wars and overthrowing other countries' governments and all that, which the CIA was doing. But the FBI was not. They were very much opposed to it. That's a story that the American people nor the world really knows. So hopefully my book can help and let people know that no, the FBI was not just a part of the CIA. It was a very, very independent agency, and my dad was a part of it.
What drove him? Because he's had a very varied career, worked in dangerous jobs. What drove him, do you believe?
It's a great question, and it might be the same thing that drives me. I think there's something about us being our genealogy, our roots in the Celtic tradition, and the generations of exploitation of the Celtic people by the British government, both here and in America. And that's the amazing thing, is that if you look at the struggles that Ireland's had and the struggles that America has had, they all seem to come from the same place, and that being the city of London and the power of the aristocracy over there.
I'm trying to get a sense of how your dad died and why he died so young. Is there something sinister in that? Did you look into that side of it? Were you concerned there was something sinister about his death?
That's in the book, and yes, the question is not answered, but it's raised as pointedly as I possibly could, to show all the evidence that would lead one to believe that he was in fact poisoned and that his death was arranged by a part of the CIA that no one knows about. Is called the Health Alteration Committee, and it was run by a man named Richard Bissell, who was also from Hartford, Connecticut, and would have known my dad's history from their common roots. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's. I'm over the 50% mark myself, saying I think he was put out of action in order to stop him from what he was doing. One of the main parts of his career was, in fact, sending a mission into Laos and to attempt to record the heroin transactions between the drug lords. The one in Laos was called Vang Pao, and the CIA. At that time, Richard Armitage was running that stuff, and the horror of the importation of heroin into this country is, people don't realize that the CIA is so involved in it. If you study what's happened to my dad, then you'll see a lot about what's happened to this country.
Did you meet much resistance when you were writing this book, when you were carrying out your research? Obviously, it would be known that you were digging and delving. Did you meet much resistance?
Yes, I'd have to say I did. There was a man whose name was General Leroy Manor, Manor, who was the chief of this part of the Pentagon called SACSA, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Operations. And this man was my father's immediate boss, supervisor. He flew into the funeral from the Philippines, where he was stationed at the time. And of all the military officers and other government officials that were at the funeral, he was the only one that came up to us, me and my sisters, and said something. And all he said was, "Your dad was a great man, and that's all I can tell you." Well,
That was, yeah, a subtle hint, something stirred in you straight away.
Well, yeah, but 50 years later, I was interviewing the author Douglas Valentine, who's a great historian of the Phoenix Project and all the evil stuff of Vietnam and otherwise. And Doug Valentine was able to identify my dad as the man who ran this certain operation in Laos to try to catch them, and in fact probably did catch them, but it was all suppressed as soon as they found out what he had done. In 2 years ago, I wrote a letter to General Manor again, and I said, you probably don't remember me, but 50 years ago, you came to my dad's funeral, and I said, was there any chance you could let me know a little more about his career? I'm really trying to know. And I got no answer at all. And a few months later, I learned that General Manor was dead. So, yeah, I don't think there was anyone that I could have asked directly about my dad's career. And I am quite certain that the books are closed, the doors are slammed, and you won't get anywhere by going over to the Pentagon and knocking on doors.
We can't give too much away. We want people to read the book, obviously. So the launch taking place today, John, where and what time?
Well, we'll be at the Temple Gate here in Ennis at 4 p.m.
Temple Gate, Ennis, 4 o'clock, the launch of McDuff Lives. John O'Loughlin, thank you very much for your time. Lovely to meet you, Marcia, as well. Thank you both for coming in, and enjoy your day and enjoy your time in Clare and in Ireland as well. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, sir. All right. Well, that was Pat Flynn of Clare FM interviewing me in the beautiful studio there in downtown Ennis, Ireland. I really want to thank Edward O'Loughlin, who was the organizer of this clan event, our Irish organizer of the O'Loughlin reunion. And he was kind enough to contact Clare FM and offer them the opportunity to interview me, which they accepted. So I'm so glad. And now we had people show up that were aware of it because of the interview. It's a it, it is really an honor to me to be able to present this book about a descendant, I mean, a son of County Clare, a son of Ennis Diamond, the beautiful town in the western part of County Clare, where my Irish ancestors come from. Well, I have another treat for you now, and that is the actual book launch itself. Once again, I want to thank my wife, Drummer, for doing some nice editing and post-production so that we have, I think, about 25 minutes of video coming up for you here. Let me cue that up, and let's see. And here you go. Well, hello, I'm John O'Loughlin from Fort Washington, Maryland, originally, now from Cobb Island, Maryland, which is a small island in the Potomac River, about 40 miles south of Washington, D.C. I haven't been back to Ireland since 2010, and I'm just so happy to be here with each of you, and the clan, or the big family that goes so far back into time and history, as became a passion of mine, I suppose. My father was very, very deeply involved in the Pentagon during the 60s which really kept him away from the family a lot. It was a time when I was going through my teens, and he was intensely involved in very high-level Pentagon activity, which I'll tell a little bit more about when I get to it. But suffice to say, I wasn't able to learn a lot from him, except for that we had a large bunch of cousins of various degrees in Connecticut, in the Hartford area, and I was, as a child, got to visit with my grandfather up there. My grandfather was Thomas F. O'Loughlin Sr., and the man that we call McDuff is my father, Thomas F. O'Loughlin Jr. Now, in 1866, Hannah Kelleher and Ross Henry O'Loughlin got married in Hartford, Connecticut, and 50 years later, they had a family portrait done. And one of the pictures in the book is that family portrait. So you'll see Ross and you'll see Hannah, who are 5 generations before me. Now, in 1916, the year that the 50th anniversary was, of course, that's when the first rebellion of this century happened. And I thought that was an interesting bit of connection, in that at that time, my grandfather, Tom Sr., was sent to Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Was a fairly new university. I think the idea was, to generate a professional class of Catholic people to integrate into the government of the United States, which was basically run by Anglo-Saxon folks, either from the Northeast, where we have our old establishment, or from the South, the old Southern establishment, but not any of them really Catholic until the 20th century. My great-granduncle, Richard Kinsella, was the first Irish-rooted Catholic to be the mayor of Hartford, Connecticut. And it was in, I think, 1918 or 19, you can correct me, that De Valera passed through, and there was a reception there, so it's quite clear that they met and knew each other. Other than that, my O'Loughlin family was trying to blend in, was trying to be upwardly mobile in the existing social order. And to do that, of course, they were required to pretty much lose their Irishness. So I did not even know that O'Loughlin was an Irish name when I was in grade school. In Maryland, in the southern part of Maryland, it's not, Baltimore is full of Irish, believe me, but where I grew up wasn't any. So as far as I knew, my name was kind of a burden, because people would say, oh, Laughlin, and tease you, because it was an unusual name to Browns and Spencers and people from that tradition. But to try to get back to my father, he was born on March the 21st of 1920. So he was 51 when he died. But he had the most amazing career, now that I've been able to study it and sort it out. And I think what really summarizes what happened to my dad, and I do believe that his early demise was arranged by some enemies in, I hope none of you are with the CIA, are you? No, any CIAs? No. Well, anyway, in the 1950s, my father was an FBI agent. And when President Kennedy was elected, he took into his cabinet a number of people, like Robert McNamara and others that were called the whiz kids. These were people who had these intellectual ideas of how they could streamline things and make everything go right, and but it was all in their heads. These were not people who had been to war like my father had. So there develops a group of people who are deeply opposed to the agenda of the CIA, and my father is one of them. So if there was skullduggery involved in his early death, I pretty much know who was behind it, and his name is Allen Dulles, D-U-L-L-E-S. So let me get into the narrative for a moment. My dad was born in New Britain, Connecticut, and grew up in Hartford with his father's paternal family. So it was a large, extended paternal O'Loughlin family. My grandfather's marriage didn't last very long. I think that grandpa, who I'll call him, was supposed to be the scion, the kid that was going to go to Catholic University, work his way into the power structure, and help the family, rise up into the ranks of the establishment. Unfortunately, he was an alcoholic. And for whatever reasons, he was unable to, he had a law degree from Catholic University, but he never passed the bar. And I think, perhaps his reluctance to go into that corporate Anglo-Saxon world may have been part of why he had a drinking problem. And maybe why because a very intelligent man, why he didn't pass the bar. He just didn't want to. So he became a school teacher. Well, my dad was taken out of public school in the 8th grade and put into a private elite boarding school called Loomis Academy. And that is in Windsor, Connecticut. It's now called Loomis Chaffee because they've merged the boys and the girls' schools, as they often do. And at Loomis, he had a full scholarship. Why was this Irish kid from, an Irish family in Hartford put into one of the elite schools of New England? And this is where the Rockefellers go. This is where all the big oil money kids go. And so why was he there? He was the only Irish name, and I have the yearbook. He's the only Irish name in the book. So after Loomis, surprise, surprise, he got a full scholarship to Harvard. Well, once again, what is this guy doing going to Harvard? I looked at his grades at Loomis. They weren't like straight A's. He had a number of B's and C's and stuff. Once again, was he picked out? Was he put into this position where he had to put on the suit and tie and the white shoes and go to Wall Street? It's what they wanted. Well, so happens that he graduated from Harvard in 1942, and there was a certain worldwide event that had just started up for America in 1941. So he was in the Navy officer training program, graduated early, and immediately joined the Navy as a midshipman in what's called the Columbia Midshipman School of the U.S. Naval Reserve. He was, for some reason, selected to be the commandant of the midshipmen. And one of his duties was to lead the parade marching, which they marched a lot all around Columbia and into whatever neighborhoods are around there. And so the first anecdote I'll give you is this. It comes from my mother. She said and of course I don't have it directly because he died, but I got it from my mother, that one day he was out leading the regiment through the neighborhood around Columbia, and the neighborhood boys, it was snowing. It was a snowstorm. And so the neighborhood boys, I guess, for some kind of a prank or for the fun of it, started throwing snowballs at these Navy guys as they're marching along, you know. And more snowballs and more snowballs. I think, if I recall correctly, somebody got hit in the eye or something, or maybe there was a rock involved, but it was like my dad had enough. So he stops, he says, "Parade, halt." And then he says, "Parade, break ranks and return fire." And you can imagine the scene from there. Well, another interesting coincidence was that when he shipped out to the Navy, he shipped out on USS Nashville. USS Nashville is a storied ship. It was a light cruiser built in Brooklyn Navy Yard in the 30s, one of a number of what are called the Brooklyn class light cruisers. And he was 22 months at sea during the war. The USS Nashville was the flagship of General MacArthur's fleet. As many of you probably know, General MacArthur, Douglas MacArthur, was the most famous and looked up to military leader of the 20s, 30s, 40s. And he selected the Nashville to be his flagship. So in the book, you'll see a picture of my dad at maybe 20, 21 years of age, looking through the binoculars of the ship at the landing on October 20th, 1944, at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. The very day that Douglas MacArthur comes off the ship, wades to the shore, walks up to the microphone, and says, "I have returned." And so there's a picture of my dad with the binoculars, General Kenny, who was the chief of MacArthur's Air Force, and General MacArthur himself. And you'll see that in the book. His ship was hit by a kamikaze 6 weeks later on December 13th of 1944. And he was a damage control officer. And one of the things that I've learned from reading the records is that when the kamikaze hit, it had two 500-pound bombs on it, and they exploded. And it blew up two of the gun turrets and killed 138 of his fellow crewmen. The rest, there was about 500 people on the ship, so it took about a third of the crew away through that hit. My father was also trained as a fireman, and he ran the fire control, and the captain of the ship credited the fire crew with saving the ship. They had the fire out in 15 minutes flat. And it's just, well, so you see, my father was a very, very competent man who had a great education, and the next thing for him was to join the regular Navy. He, among thousands of reservists, he was invited to become an officer in the regular Navy. But he heard from home, he heard from Hartford, Connecticut. His father, my grandfather, was apparently in bad shape with alcohol, and perhaps a little worried about the fact that my father wasn't going to take up that burden either. He was going to join the Navy and family would lose control over him anyway, so they said, "You have to come home," and so he did. So he left the Navy, went home, went to law school at the University of Connecticut, graduated first in his class, but instead of going into the big law firms, he decided to set a different course and join the FBI. As an FBI agent, he had a number of duties
But I've talked to an author about the FBI in the 40s and 50s, and he's told me that what he could see was that my dad was an intimate of J. Edgar Hoover, that he used my dad to talk to other agencies, to interface, as a liaison with the CIA or with any of the other groups that Hoover had business with. And so he got to know a lot of people and a lot of stuff that was going on. When President Kennedy was elected in 1960 and initiated his presidency in 1961, a huge disaster befell President Kennedy, and that was called the Bay of Pigs. And the Bay of Pigs is a little bay in Cuba that was designated for the Cuban exiles who were living in Florida and training with the CIA to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. And this was the CIA's plan. Well, as you know, it failed. It was a huge disaster, and President Kennedy fired Allen Dulles at that time, as well as fired 3 other of the top CIA people. And he asked his brother Robert to organize some people that would come in and be loyal to him. And it appears that my father was selected out of that process, somebody that would be loyal to the president and not to the CIA. Because this is where the conflict is still behind the scenes in our country and in our lives, is that there is this behind the scenes a dispute between the older, like the MacArthur types or my dad or others that come from an older tradition, and the newer tradition of the Wall Street CIA types that are basically working with the oil companies and the Rockefellers and all of the real money that generates a lot of the bad stuff that's happened in the world. So my dad, as I learned from the author Douglas Valentine, who wrote a very important book about the Phoenix program in Vietnam, exposing what the CIA was doing. And my dad was in this Pentagon office that is called SACSA, and it's the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, meaning he's in charge of all of the special operations of any branch of any government agency, military or civilian, per President Kennedy's orders, that he was no longer letting the CIA run the show. This was all about taking control back from the CIA. Where is he going to put it? He's going to put it in the Pentagon. So my dad was recruited and joined the Pentagon in 1962. He then was in a position to supervise secretly all of the secret operations all around the world. One of the big ones was going on then was Laos, where the CIA was running an operation that coordinated with the local drug dealer, Vang Pao, who was one of the Hmong, H-M-O-N-G people. He was basically set up to run the caravans from the opium country down into the city where it could be refined and sold. Well, my father, it turns out, organized a secret military mission to go into Laos and photograph and record these transactions as they were going on. And that story is not told in my book, but it is told in a book by Douglas Valentine himself called TDY. So they ran the operation, they got the film, they got the movies, and they had the goods on them. But unfortunately, the CIA had better communication skills, and they had monitored the whole thing. It turns out they have the ability to listen to anything. You know, they can listen to me right now talking, and they can listen to you, whatever, anywhere they want to, they can hear it. So they were not unaware of the operation. They just let it unfold, and then after it was done, they just swept everybody up. And for some reason, my dad wasn't like shot or fired or anything, but it wasn't but a couple of years later that he came down with cancer. And I won't tell you the whole story about that, frankly, because I don't know the ending of it. And one of the things that I really would like to know is, can I find a smoking gun to see that they set him up? But I do believe that they did. There's a lot more to talk about here than I can possibly share with you in a short presentation. But here's my real point. You take somebody, you know, from an immigrant family. The family wants to rise up into the culture, but the culture doesn't allow the culture of the immigrant family to be part of his life anymore. What does that do to you inside? What does it do to your inner self? I think it's very alienating. And I myself have felt alienated in the American culture, and perhaps it's because of that Celtic blood that we have. Dad died on June 6, 1971 of cancer. It spread quickly. It was called metastasized cancer, which is one of the indications that it was a poisoning, that it takes into more than one organ, you know. But I think the fact is that the forces behind the scenes would use whatever means necessary to gain and retain control. And only people like my dad, whose story would never have been told but for the great fortune I've had in doing my research. But for him, you know, we would not have the chance to right the ship, to make it right again. And so when I was first working on this with a group of other people who like to delve into these things, I said, you know, I can't talk about my dad. I've got all these relatives, you know, in Connecticut, and they don't want, you know, I don't want them to know this stuff. So we said, well, what's a good pseudonym? And we talked, and my friend George says, well, let's call him McDuff, because McDuff comes in at the end of the Macbeth play after all the bad stuff, and he cleans up. He says, let's straighten this place out. Let's get back to normal, you know, 12th century Scotland government, whatever that was. But to get rid of the stain, you know, on Lady Macbeth's gown, to get rid of the stain on the culture, the stain on the country, the stain on the government. And I think we still are bearing those stains right now. So my hope is that by learning my dad's story, that we can contribute to that process of cleaning up. If there are some questions, I'll take a couple. Catherine.
Did you suggest that cancer could be caused by poisoning, or did I pick?
No, I did.
How can you give somebody cancer?
Well, polonium, radium. There's if you watch the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSAC committee with Richard Helms testifying, and Frank Church's committee, then you'll hear, I think it's Colby. It's William Colby who says, yes, we do. And they show this gun. They say, you know, this is a heart attack gun. You want to give somebody a heart attack, you know? And they have something similar. They had something similar for cancer. I've done a lot of research. I don't have the answer yet, but I'm working on it in his particular case. But there's something that really just shocked me. I said, how could they possibly do that? But here's what they did. The CIA formed a committee called the Health Alteration Committee. You can look it up. It's a real thing. So yeah, if you look into it, you'll find that, as creepy as it is, yeah, they figured it out. It's a Machiavellian world in that very deep, dark, you know, thing called the CIA. Yeah. Wow is right. So, look at the book, and the end of the book, I tell you, I don't have the medical everything, but by the time you get to the end of the book, I hope to have convinced you that my opinion carries the day. Well, thanks everyone again. I appreciate your attention, and be very happy to sign a book to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks very much for paying attention to my presentation there at the Temple Gate Hotel in Ennis, Ireland. And I did have a great success with getting some books out into the hands of the O'Loughlin clan, and they will spread around the world with it. And, my dad's story is going to be told. It is being told. You guys are telling it. And every day that I can, I will be presenting more material here on McDuff Lives 2, and any other channel I need to start if I get another strike. But we will persevere and get my father's story out to everyone that's willing to listen to it, because I think it is the key to understanding how did the CIA go so bad? How did they turn? And what can good people do to rectify the situation, to reignite the republic that it was intended to be, and that it still can be, if we work together and we stop allowing these creepy, murderous assassins that work behind the scenes. We've got to just say no. No to assassinations, no to health alteration committees. Say no to these un-American, immoral, and even genocidal acts that are committed in the name of our country. So that's the mission. Thanks for helping. And I will see you guys on Monday.